Hello, and in the famous words of Bill Murray from the Groundhog Day movie, I'll give you a wins prediction. It's going to be cold. It's going to be grey. It's almost as predictable as Juventus favouring from another VAR decision. Welcome to the Anglo-Italian podcast. I'm Adam, and I'm joined by my good friend
Andy. How you doing?
Hey, Andy, how are you? How has your weekend been? We have been speaking offline, but it sounds like it's been quite eventful, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's this past week was quite chill, but obviously on the football front, probably less than chill. But yeah, it's been all right. How have you been on your end?
I've been very good, thank you. Rushed off my feet literally because our good friend Craig went off on holiday, so I was looking after his Cocker Spaniel, and yeah, we had lots of walks. It has to be said. Obviously, you know from looking after dogs yourself, they do like to get very excitable and they do love their walks. So yeah, definitely felt like I was never ending in that department.
They love their zoomies, don't they?
It was still enjoyable nonetheless. I'll catch up on my sleep another time, that's for sure. But for viewers and listeners, you may notice that we are missing a certain co-host. Unfortunately, Rory is under the weather. So we wish him well.
It's his turn to die this week.
It is his turn to be unwell. So we wish him well. Hopefully he'll be back with us shortly. But myself and Andy will talk you through the weekend's games and all the talking points. But before we get into it, Andy, let's talk about our favourite moments from the week or weekend. So if I hand it over to yourself, what has been the special moment that caught your eye?
Well, there's a couple of ones. You got Zlatan Ibrahimovic becoming the oldest goal scorer, I think, in Serie A history. Big moment. It's been called up to the Sweden squad at 41 years old. So that's some going. There was obviously the events of the Fulham meltdown from yesterday.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
something else. So yeah, and obviously the Blackburn Sheffield United game was a classic as well. It feels like the FA Cup magic has returned this season. I don't know what it is, but it just feels like there's more intensity and passion for it than it perhaps has been in previous years. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like the underdogs have been doing themselves some justice. Unfortunately, we didn't get that necessarily the giant killing this weekend. Brighton put saw to that pretty much within a couple of minutes into the game, to be fair. But yeah, I think for me, it's beautiful to see a bit more different teams in that kind of quarterfinal, and certainly looking forward to that semi-final lineup, that's for sure. But for me, moment of the weekend comes from Italy. You'll be surprised to hear Catania, who many of our pod listeners may remember from latter years, in particular around the 2009, 2010s. Famous side based in Sicily. And they were basically essentially relegated to Serie D.
Already?
They're due to financial irregularities, but they have got themselves back up the league. So yes, it's great to see them. Another story though, also from the weekend. So we saw Catanzaro, who have been promoted to Serie B. They took nearly 8,000 fans on a 4-hour trip to see them beat Gelbison 2-0. So fantastic effort by their fans. And beautiful moment. But I don't know if you saw this, Rory. Even Andy. See, I'm just used to seeing Rory all the time. But Andy, the best moment for me personally was in the Championship. It was Rotherham versus Cardiff City. I don't know if you saw the video, but the announcement of the game being postponed and all four sides cheered because it was that terrible of a match. They could not surface
I saw the pitch as well. It was apparently Cardiff weren't too happy, obviously, because they were ahead. But it's proper Sunday League stuff going on in the Championship.
Definitely. If you saw the guy that was trying to mop up the water off the pitch, he was bringing it more onto the pitch than it was actually going off it. But Andy, obviously, we are going to go with the listeners and those viewing right now through the weekend's games. In particular, we'll be talking about the FA Cup, as you alluded to. We've also got the Premier League. There's a lot of results that took place there. We've also got Serie A. There's some phenomenal games that happened this weekend even. Some interesting scorelines. Sampdoria, who I'm actually donning the shirt right now, winning a game. Incredible. And then obviously between us two, unfortunately we're not joined by Rory, but we will speculate about that Italy and England game coming up on Thursday night. And get your thoughts as well, because there's been a few withdrawals today in terms of that England squad. Interestingly also, Andy, I don't know if you saw it, Jimmy Hasselbank potentially being part of the England setup, which
I've not seen that at all.
Apparently being a goal or striker coach essentially. Hopefully he gets more out of Harry Kane.
I'm not really sure what much more you could get out of him. He does an all right job as it is. But
maybe it's more for the other strikers. Who knows?
Yeah,
maybe so. But let's go into the break and we will see you on the other side. And we are here and we will talk about the FA Cup. But let's start off by talking about Handy, that particular game that kind of came to the end of this FA Cup quarterfinal run. And we're talking about your beloved Man United and the Fulham scenes. It was a bit squeaky bum time until that certain incident, wasn't it, Andy? But what did you make of the whole game? What was your thoughts? And were you a bit disappointed by how Man United started in this game?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if it wasn't for that meltdown, we should have we would have well and truly deserved to be knocked out. Fulham were the best team by far for pretty much all of the game up until that point, really. One of the things they're very good at is they get the ball out wide really, really quickly. We were making Willian look like he was 25 again. I mean, to be fair to him, he has considering what he was like at Arsenal, he does seem to be. I didn't expect him to be in England again. I didn't expect him to be playing as consistently and as well as he has been, to be fair. Yeah. You got to give him his dues. He's played incredibly well. And that was the main plan of attack. You've got Mitrovic as a big focal point. And when Mitrovic is in the mood, which he was in many ways yesterday, but he is very much a handful. Obviously, you've got Andreas Pereira as well. He looked like he had something to prove on his return to Old Trafford as well. Yeah, and Paulinho as well. I mean, he's been like that all season, but out of that, up against McTominay and Sabitzer, he was the best midfielder out of a lot. So, and I think when the goal came, it was just. I remember texting my mate saying that's been coming for a good sort of 10 minutes or so. Yeah. It was coming, we thought, the end of the first half, thought, okay, we've gone in 0-0, come out firing the second half. But it was Fulham on top the whole way through. So, no, to be fair, they played well, but, the changes that were made did make a difference. Bringing on Anthony at the point Ten Hag did brought a bit more intensity, a bit more pace to the game. So I think with United, they're a little bit knackered at the moment, to be honest. You've had the same 11 playing more or less week in, week out. So I think you are seeing in recent performances the lack of depth that's there. There's no Van der Beek, there's no Eriksen, there's no Casemiro. It's quite an under-resourced, especially midfield at the moment. So, but yeah, and obviously if you go up to the incident itself, I mean, I don't understand why it's proved controversial. I mean, Willian puts his hand out. The ball's going. If he doesn't put his hand there, the ball's going in the net. So that was deserved red card, deserved penalty. Alexander Mitrovic, he didn't need to do it, but he was literally
he didn't. No.
Going up to the ref, swearing in his face, shoved him quite forcibly, like Di Canio style. Deservedly got sent off, and obviously Marco Silva probably said enough to get himself sent off. So
yeah.
It was all of Fulham's doing, unfortunately for them.
Definitely. I think a lot of Fulham fans were basically saying, had Mitrovic stayed on the pitch, they could have got something out of it. Not guaranteed, obviously, but I think they actually stand a chance of maybe not conceding so late on. I mean, they did valiantly well, I have to say. But yeah, I do feel for that. One kind of question that you've already talked about, that kind of penalty point, but I wanted to kind of highlight about Man United. Obviously, you talked about how fatigued they are. Does this kind of underline the issues that you haven't got the depth, even when you're bringing likes of McTominay and Maguire into the squad, who I thought they had pretty poor games? What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've said for a while, I mean, I love, the passion that McTominay has, and he gives 100% every time he's on the pitch. But I think what's becoming quite clear at this particular point is if you're a team looking to be fighting to get out the top end of the table, he's not the guy who's going to make a difference against top class midfielders. And when you look at when you look at the Premier League, he's quite good as like in a sort of a box-to-box attacking midfielder, but he hasn't got the technical ability to be able to take the ball from deep. He can win the ball back very well, but he doesn't have the best imagination when he's on it, and he often he doesn't put himself into a position where he can receive the ball in good spaces. It's a part of the game which I think at 25, 26, he's not going to develop to a suitable level. And I think in terms of what Ten Hag wants from midfielder, you see it with the signing of Eriksen and to an extent Sabitzer. That's the kind of midfielder that he wants there. So I think, for as much as he'll probably play a part as best he can towards the end of the season, I certainly think, with Manchester United being in a position where they need to sell to buy, he'll be one of the ones that Ten Hag could be more willing to let go. And with Maguire as well, I think he's going to get game time between now and the end of the season. Obviously, Varane, his fitness is always, you have to be careful of it. He has been available for the large parts, but when you're playing every 3 days, you do have to manage your fitness. I think that's what Ten Hag's doing. But again, it's difficult. Although he's okay, he still had a couple of clumsy moments, just like falling over right in the penalty box, and he does make some strange decisions at times. So I think his long-term future is certainly under question as well.
Well, let's move on to the other games now. The game that me and Rory did really fancy watching this weekend, and it turned out to be a blockbuster, was Sheffield United versus Blackburn Rovers. I never thought I'd utter those words together, but it was a fascinating match. You got two teams in the Championship doing really well. I really fancied looking at this John Dahl Thomason side because they've been kind of threatening over the last few rounds. Obviously, we saw a little bit of it against Leicester City, but it was fascinating to see how they played, the intensity. It feels like a team that could fit really well in the Premier League. But then you've also got the contrast of Sheffield United. We saw what they could do, albeit against a Wrexham side, Hollywood FC of the conference, shall we say. But yeah, they came out trumps in the end. What was your natural thoughts of this game? Because we saw it as a 3-2 victor for Sheffield United, but at the time, I didn't think it was going to go that way.
No, I think with Blackburn, they took their chances quite well, to be fair to them. I think there were times they were under pressure, but they were able to get the goals, on the break when they needed to. And I think, sort of Sheffield United dominated possession. Sometimes maybe little bit dozy on occasions, and with Blackburn, the times I have seen them, they do tend to press reasonably well. The likes of Ben Diaz will hustle and harry for the ball as well, put in the hard work. But I think both teams deserve a huge amount of credit, to be honest, because they're both teams in a very similar position. They're chasing promotion, certainly chasing for the playoff side of things. And it felt like two teams playing with nothing to lose. When I think you could tell the difference between teams that have got their eye on staying in the division or other things, between two teams that you go, you know what, we're in a good position, we can really go for it. Blackburn, they're 4 points ahead in the playoffs. Sheffield United are 3 points ahead of Middlesbrough in the in the automatic promotion places. So I think it felt like the kind of game where both teams felt, let's just go for it. Neither team will have a better opportunity to go to Wembley in the next few years. And I think that really played into it. Both teams, it's proper blood and thunder stuff. Like
it was
full commitment, proper challenges. Nothing particularly dirty. It's just really
just well thought out game, right?
Really well thought teams against, but and I think it was quite evenly matched as well. Both teams would have felt had it gone either way, could feel they could beat each other. So it's the sort of game that the FA Cup needs. Both two teams from the Championship taking it seriously, and they could both be very proud of their cup run.
Definitely. And I think, interestingly, there's a slight change of dynamic for Sheffield United this week going into the game, because there's the news about their financial situation. So I don't know if you saw this, Andy, but they're at a point where they can't afford certain things. So like fertilizer on the actual pitches, for example, can't even afford the markings on the pitch.
Sheffield United?
Sheffield United, supposedly... So this started off earlier in the season. Apparently, they've missed payments for the likes of Ryan Brewster on this transfer. They are supposedly 18 million in debt. We've had today also Wigan Athletic.
I saw the Wigan news, but that's not the first time for them this season, is it?
We've had Huddersfield earlier in the week as well, going into that route. There's numerous other clubs that are currently in that position, the likes of Reading, for example, have had that kind of embargo on them. I can't remember, was it Burnley as well at the beginning of last week as well, before this Man City match? They've also got an embargo. So it kind of, I think it's alarming that the amount of Championship clubs that are now coming out where they're not able to kind of file their paperwork at the moment. And they were saying if Sheffield United weren't in this FA Cup run, they probably would be suffering from this. Now, if they were to go into administration, they'd be suffering a 12-point deduction, which would take them to 6 points, or sixth place, should I say, in the playoffs. So they'd be just a point ahead of Norwich City as it currently stands in that Championship table. It feels like at the moment they're just on the cusp. It
feels like they have to get promoted. It reminds me of that Aston Villa situation. Do you remember a couple of years ago where it was literally promotion or bust? And then it was stay up or bust. Like, they were that close. And I think there's always the teams that have recently come down from the Premier League. Huddersfield for the last 2 years, Sheffield United. I mean, I did think it was strange that Sheffield United was spending like £18 million on the likes of Ryan Brewster, and clearly they've kept that wage bill in anticipation of going up. And obviously we didn't go straight back up last season. They had to spend an extra season of the Championship, and it's baffling. The most baffling one out of that is Reading, though. I saw somewhere they're spending 140% of their turnover on wages.
I know, that's insane.
It's just
you wonder what the wages are, because if you remember, they had George Puskas, who they bought in from Inter, and he's no longer there anymore. So he must be what, 20, 30k?
You do wonder, but that's the thing I don't get, is that they've not been in the Premier League for a few years. Like, you're talking like 7 or 8 years, I think, since they were last in the Prem. Like, I don't understand what's going through the mind. And what's funny is that they've got Paul Ince as a manager, and they've been absolutely nowhere near the Premier League. Like, nowhere near the playoffs most of the time.
5 years.
Speaking about the Paul Ince diverging slightly, going back to the last year, he was criticising the Manchester United coaching staff and saying, the likes of Michael Carrick aren't qualified to be in that job. And you look at where Michael Carrick
and you see where he is with Middlesbrough.
Yeah,
exactly.
and they just would beat Reading like 5-0 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's but yeah, I think that the financial state has been like that since COVID and just before.
Yeah.
I remember when COVID kicked off, they were saying the vast majority of Championship clubs are not very far at all from going bust. And the likes of Wigan as well, like they keep going through this cycle where they go into administration, they get a new owner, get promoted, go to administration, get a new owner. I think since Dave Whelan sadly passed away, they've done that about 2 or 3 times in the space of a few years, which again, the EFL need to have something in place where they go, right, rather than just, it seems to have this process where, have you got enough money for the takeover? Yes. Have you got enough money for this season? Yes, but there's no forward planning. I think there needs to be a process and go, what are you going to do for 5 years? Where's the money coming from? And I think
X amount is kept into an account where it can be used for wages. Therefore, you have to pay it in. Otherwise, you cannot carry on or become an owner, right? Something along those lines. It's farcical. But Andy, we have got 2 other games to quickly just summarize as well. So we'll start off with your noisy neighbours, the blue half of City. They trounced Burnley 6-0. I think it was game, set and match by the point that it was the second goal went in. Haaland seems to be a man on a mission to create more records. What do you say about that performance? I mean,
it's not really much you can say, and I kind of knew that result was coming. Burnley have an awful record against Manchester City anyway. Just generally, even when they're in the Premier League.
Yeah.
And with the way Vincent Kompany was never ever going to change the way his team plays just for one game.
Of course.
Yeah. And when you try, if you're a Championship side and you try to play Man City at their own game, it's only going to end one way.
Yeah.
And I guess his variables like you can't do anything about Erling Haaland. To be fair, none of his goals were spectacular, to be honest, but he just has that knack of being in the right place at the right time. And it's just, take away his physicality and all that kind of stuff, which obviously helps him, but he's just there all of the time. Like we talk about Osimhen in Serie A, he's just always there where you need him to be. And I still don't think City are using him as to his potential. Which
I'll say one observation
say.
On that. I think it was his second or third goal. They played it a bit more direct. So they didn't necessarily do the tippy-tappy kind of style that Pep always loves. But I felt like on 2 of those goals, they were a lot more directs. And it felt like, I don't know about you, they should be doing that a lot more because that's what he thrives on. That's what he did at Dortmund. I think that's what's missing. But let's talk about also Brighton. They did kill off the dream for Grimsby Town. Having said that, Grimsby Town made it very easy for them. But 5-0 victors on the day. Word on Grimsby, just fantastic to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think they've done well over the past sort of few seasons since bidding off Ian Holloway, which always seems to be the solution to most clubs' problems, doesn't it? But no, they've done really, really well in this FA Cup. They've had some good runs over the past couple of years. To be fair, they're going steadily in League Two. Looks like they'll get the points required to to stay up. And I think, they could be very, very, very proud of themselves of the TV money they'll get from those games. That's probably going to set them up for a good, couple of years if they spend it correctly. But I think the class of Brighton told really. I think my favourite moment was obviously that Evan Ferguson.
His finishes were good.
Yeah, I mean, those couple of touches he made for his goal, beautiful. I mean, it looks like De Zerbi's unearthed somebody who could perhaps give him a more clinical edge at a number 9 because they're still, for all we praise Brighton, they're still lacking a true number 9, and maybe one's been sat there the whole time from their academy.
I did love his comments though after the game. He said 2 games in the stands, one 4-0, another 5-0. I think it's better I get a season ticket for the last part of the season. Pretty much sums it up. But Andy, obviously that does mean Brighton do take on Man United in the semi-final, whereas Man City have a slightly easier tie with Sheffield United. Are you kind of excited about this kind of semi-final tie? Because I suspect, Brighton will cause you trouble.
Yeah. It's exciting to obviously be in the semi-finals as a fan, but definitely not excited for the prospects of playing Brighton. They've made an absolute embarrassment of us the last couple of times we played them, and if we play like we did against Fulham, they'll batter us. That is not a joke. Hopefully, some personnel will be back by then, because thankfully there's a good 1 month gap between this round. I think it's like the 21st of April, that kind of weekend, that the next round is played. So I think a lot of it would depend on where those teams are at in a month's time. I think if the game was to be played tomorrow, I think Brighton could potentially, would most certainly fancy their chances of winning. But like I said, it depends what the situation is in 6 weeks' time. I think with the Manchester City Sheffield United game, I think they're going to I think City will absolutely stuff them, to be honest. And they'll get through to the final.
Good stuff. Well, we will now go to the Premier League after this break. And we are here for the Premier League. And Andy, there was only a handful of games due to the fact that FA Cup weekend did take place, but we've got some fantastic talking points. So let's start off with Southampton 3, Spurs 3. And it was not so much about the result, it's more about the aftermath of a certain Antonio Conte that we will probably generate most of the talking point for this match. But Spurs are typically Spursy, aren't they? It's only Tottenham, right? As Alex Ferguson says. So yeah, Conte spoke some home truths in his interview or press conference afterwards. You shared a fantastic tweet with us on the group about what he also said about Daniel Levy and co at Spurs. Your initial thoughts when it first came out, what did you think?
I mean, that's just a man begging to be sacked during the international break. It's like Jose Mourinho. He's taken the Jose Mourinho guidebook to get himself sacked as quickly as possible.
Just to new levels, right?
And the aftermath of those comments seemed to be that the players aren't too particularly happy about it, and yeah, it feels like a situation where just get shot over the international break. I think the game itself, Spurs, did play some all right football. Pedro Porro got his first goal for the club. Looked decent, especially after a rocky couple of games for them, and they're still ultimately in 4th place.
Somehow,
granted, Newcastle got 2 games on them. And so do Liverpool. So that might not necessarily be the case come a month or so's time. But yeah, if you go to Conte's comments, I mean, a lot of what he said isn't necessarily untrue. I think Tottenham Hotspur seem to have built a culture and a structure where winning isn't important. It reminds me a little bit of Ed Woodward at Man United, but he said at a conference that we could still be commercially successful without being successful on the pitch, and that certainly seems to be the approach that Tottenham are taking, with the NFL stuff. And it feels, I think a lot of fans, certainly from the tweets that I've read, it feels like the football's not necessarily the priority. I think someone I follow pointed out that Davinson Sanchez has outlasted Pochettino, Mourinho, going to outlast Conte. And I think that that kind of instance, the inability to replace personnel, since they lost that Champions League final against Liverpool, it has cost them. And I think they are right. Conte and the fans are right. Nothing's really going to change whilst Daniel Levy is running the club the way that it is. But Conte's got to take some responsibility himself. Like, he's one of the most expensively remunerated managers in the Premier League, and his tactic seems to be, like Mourinho, is give it to Kane and Son and hope they do something. And I'm not being funny. You'd hope for a bit more than that.
Exactly.
He's got to take his fair share of it. I can't think of many. I can't think of many players who he's improved. He's tried to bring in personnel to make the team better, but I've not seen him take any of the existing players and make them better. Son's regressed a little bit. Kane, to be fair, he's still doing his bit. I think he's one player you can't really put too much criticism at, but yeah, when you're still playing like Davinson Sanchez and Eric Dyer at centre back, that's on you. That's on him, to be honest with you. They've still got no proper imagination in the centre of midfield. They're still quite, with the likes of Højbjerg, he's serviceable and good, and certainly in a defensive sense, but he's not going to unlock a defence for you.
No, he's a defensive-minded player at the end of the day.
And it's just everything about all the decisions that they've made over the past few years, apart from obviously the wonderful, wonderful stadium that they've got, they've still got a core of the squad that, they haven't been ambitious enough to replace.
The way I see it is they're dead wood. They're essentially players that have gone past the sell-by dates and they need shipping off. Unfortunately, because of the high wages, because of the high fees involved, they're not going to be able to recoup that. So that's the problem that Spurs have. And in an interesting stat, Andy, I kind of did this on Saturday. I had a look at the amount of managers they've had since 1974. I think I counted around 31 managers in that space of time. Now, granted, you can say that's before Enoch's time, that's before Daniel Levy's time, but there doesn't seem to be a clear, coherent understanding of where they want to drive this club. Because if you think about even before kind of Maurizio Pochettino time, they were going through managers like they were nothing. Like maybe the most stable time they had was maybe under Harry Redknapp at the time, and that was a bit like fortuitous, I felt, at times. But that's more managers than Liverpool have had during the whole course of their history. And I'm sure that's the same with Man United, I suspect, without even looking at the books. I think that shows what the issues are. But you're right to say Conte needs to take the responsibility, because partially his fault as well as the club. Just conscious that we want to talk about some other games as well. One other kind of game that really I thought we should talk about is Chelsea drawing 2-2 against Everton. Everton fantastically getting themselves back into the game twice. Ellis Sims obviously coming on as a sub. I think it was literally with 5 minutes ago, and superbly spins his defender Koulibaly to slot past Kepa, who I thought could have done better for that equaliser. But more issues for Chelsea. On this occasion, I felt like they couldn't defend to save their lives. But it's a typical kind of Dyche thing to do, like turn up at these places and just play the unattractive football that gets results. Do you think Everton have turned the kind of corner?
Yeah, I think with Everton is that on the large part, what Dyche has done is he's kept them in games. They've not given up, and they're grinding out results out of sometimes nothing. Not even despite Chelsea's slightly dodgy form. I don't think anyone expected them to Everton to come out of a result for that one. But with that midfield of Onana, Trezeguet, and Doucouré, that is a hard-working, hard-hitting midfield that can last a full game. They've got a little bit of quality about them as well, and I think he's certainly he's doing what Lampard couldn't do in the year or so that he was there, and make them look a lot more solid. But I think with going to Chelsea, though, I think Koulibaly, I think 2/3 into a season, I think it's a reasonable judgment to make that it hasn't worked out as they'd expected. He's been quite poor for quite a large part of the season. He's got an error. He always sees, he seems to have quite a lot of errors in him at the moment.
Yeah.
The Koulibaly that I saw at Napoli a couple of years ago, I don't think would have let Sims turn him the way that he did. He'd have gone a couple of yards further back, at least took him out wide. And I think that, I think with Chelsea, they're still searching for their identity. But again, until they get a proper number 9, they're not going to go anywhere. Kai Havertz is their top scorer with 7 goals in the Premier League. Raheem Sterling is on 4. And to be fair, I think it's not unreasonable to say that you'd expect a better return for the money and the wages.
I think the thing with Sterling is he has scored more goals. They're always bloody offside, or he gets himself offside, right? But yeah.
He got those decisions at City, but now he's moved.
Exactly. There is that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of Chelsea, I mean, do we expect those kind of issues to be resolved? Do you think it's just going to take time? Because it felt like for a period of time, Potter was getting somewhere with this squad, or is there some?
I think he is. I think he is getting somewhere. You look at the games against, you look at their sort of recent games, to pull out the result that they did against Bournemouth. They've been unlucky with some of the injuries that they've had with Chilwell and Reece James being out injured for quite a long time. Now that they're back, they seem to give them a bit more thrust, a bit more penetration in attack. They've ground out results against Leeds and away at Leicester City. And I think I think Potter is starting to find his best 11. I think having those first choice figures available will certainly help him out. But there are some things that Potter or Chelsea as a whole aren't going to be able to address until the summer. As much as Kepa sort of redemption arc has been quite admirable, I still don't. He's still not going to be good enough to be a number 1 for them in the long term. I think they've done well to get what they have out of him, considering he was out in the cold. Michel Felix as well. I think he's a fantastic player, but he needs to be in the hole behind the number 9, not as the number 9. And that's what we're doing. And I think Potter's just trying to make the most of what he has available to them at the moment. I think that Fernandes Kovacic midfield is started to work quite well. And I think if you could keep Reece James and Ben Chilwell fit for the rest of the season, that would give them there. I mean, that does beg the question of why they spent 60 odd million pounds on Cucurella. They spent 60 million pounds on a left back that they didn't really need, where that could have been spent on the forward. But I think the league doesn't matter too much to them this season. I think if they do themselves justice in Europe, which they have got previous for. Thomas Tuchel did it in his first season at Chelsea. Even Roberto Di Matteo had a shocking league campaign, but got them together for those one-off games where they seem to really pull together and go above themselves. So it's not unreasonable to think that might happen with Chelsea. So I think Potter will get given till the summer to get some personnel in, but if he doesn't start next season, well, he'll be off. And I think Chelsea seem determined to make it work.
Yes, this is it. Quickly, I want to kind of move on to Crystal Palace taking on Arsenal. So Arsenal here, 4-1 victors on the day. I wanted to talk more so on Crystal Palace because obviously they made that kind of sharp change. They moved to sack Patrick Vieira after that defeat against Brighton. At the time, I was a bit bewildered by that personally, but I can see why they've decided to do that because of the form. Having said that, the rumours are Roy Hodgson might be coming back. And I'm looking at their kind of fixture run going forward. If they kept Vieira, and let's just say hypothetically, there's no change to the result against Arsenal, they still lose. They've got more of a favourable run going forwards because it's against teams that they could win games against. So, if you look at the next game, they've got Leicester, Then they've got the likes of Leeds still to play. Let me have a look at that fixture list again. I believe they've still got to go away to Southampton. They're at home to Everton and away to Wolves. These are big games that you anticipate. I personally would say they get at least, say, 4 to 5 points out of that run. Do you think the decision to sack Vieira has been a bit of a weird one, or do you kind of side with Crystal Palace fans that kind of see the form and kind of go, there was no plan B? There doesn't seem like there was a way out for him.
I mean, I'm looking at Crystal Palace's games that they've had since the turn of the year when they last won the game. They've played, they've played Tottenham, they've Chelsea, they've played Manchester United twice. They've played a very good Newcastle and Brighton side. They've played Manchester City. Like the only games where I felt, maybe they could, they played Brentford and Villa away from home as well. So there's not really many games out of that where you'd look and go, yeah, you should be winning that, if I'm being completely honest. And they're still in 12th place, but I think they've just panicked because although they're in 12th place, which is where they were last season, they're only a couple of points of relegation, and we're in a unique situation where we're, pretty much near coming towards the final quarter of the Premier League, and 3 out of 9 teams could realistically go down this season. The bit that doesn't make sense, so I can understand the logic in sacking him if you've not won in about 11, 12 games, and you think, right, I need to get some points. Bringing Roy Hodgson back this late in the season, it feels like a regression because they spent an awful lot. They invested in Vieira and the squad, to change the style and the type of personnel, and the type of football that Crystal Palace have been known for under Roy Hodgson, to go back to him. And I'm not necessarily, and to be fair, there's no guarantee it will work either because Roy Hodgson took over Watford in a good 3 or 4 months earlier in the season last year, and they still went down. It just feels like a bit of a aggressive move, and it feels like they've panicked, realised they don't have many options, and got on the phone to Roy because he knows the place and he knows the players. It feels like a very sort of lazy, hastily thought out decision. That deal's not even agreed either, so it's very clear that they've had no plan. They felt like they'd just given themselves the international break to sort of make a decision somewhere. But what do you think on your end?
I think with the players they had at this disposal and thinking about the clubs that are around them in that kind of space, I still feel like they would have got results somewhere along the line, enough to keep them up. I appreciate they were kind of on the way down, but I kind of go back to January transfer window and think, did they really give Vieira a chance to actually bring in some players? Striker-wise, they were always kind of a bit not. I don't think they've got enough quality, should we say? I mean, Edouard, I don't know how long that's going to kind of rub off and he will eventually start scoring goals, but it doesn't feel like he's scoring them on a consistent basis. Mateta, when he first came, seemed to have this rich vein of form, and it's kind of gone by the wayside. And I wonder, who else could they bring in? Like Wilfried Zaha, I don't necessarily believe he's the natural replacement for either of those two. He's proving it with his current form. He's more of a winger. Realistically, he's not the kind of player to score you goals. So that leaves you with a huge dilemma. I do feel like Eberechi seems to be used sparingly. I do wonder why that has been the case. And because every time he's come on, he always seems to be the bright spark. He seems to create stuff. Much like Michael Elise, for example.
I know Eze had a long-term injury last season. I think maybe that's he hasn't quite come back in the form that he was in prior to that injury. I think maybe that's a potential reason for it. But
could be that. But I mean, easily as well. You think about defensively. Do we feel they're strong enough? Like with the players that they've got. So I feel like there's only one thing that team can do, and that's attack. They've got attacking-minded players, right? So play to your strengths.
And that again is kind of leads to the decision of why would you pick Roy Hodgson, because he's
exactly.
not. If Patrick Vieira can't get anything out of that attacking group of players, I'm not necessarily sure what they're going to get. And I think, going back to their defence, you got the likes of Joel Ward that have been at Palace for years and probably should have long since been replaced by this point. James Tompkins as well, like he's a championship level centre back that shouldn't still really be at Crystal Palace. And, the likes of sort of Will Hughes, Nathaniel Klein, Jairo Valdevirel, they've been at the club for quite a while, and they're not. Same Jordan Ayew as well. There's still a good group of players that should really have been moved on at this point. And as you alluded to earlier, it feels like the hierarchy haven't been able to make those moves happen to give them the budget room to get somebody else in.
But also, Andy, I mean, just quickly, where do you think Crystal Palace should be as a like? If you think at the beginning of the season, do you think 13th is respectable? Given, I think so as well, and given that Vieira last season took them to a FA Cup semi-final as well, which is probably unexpected for them. Like, granted, this feels like Vieira was just suffering that second season syndrome where, like, just things don't go right. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, right? But he's still got a decent squad. Like, you feel, I personally feel like he would have got the best out of them for the following season if they didn't, end up where they desired, for example. I don't know. I just feel like it's just short-sighted. They've kind of looked at it, like you say, they've looked at the money side and gone, we can't afford to go down. We can't afford to do X, so we need to stay up in this league. And it just feels like a Sam Allardyce is going to come through the door and then cause a more mayhem in the long run. So
yeah, it does. Yeah, and I don't. If they finish the season in 12th, like I'm fairly sure most Palace fans think that's where they'd expect to be.
Yeah.
They've not spent the kind of money, like West Ham have, for instance, where if you spent the kind of money that West Ham have, for instance, then maybe you think we should be pushing for top half, but they haven't got the players, they haven't spent the money or invested the money to be able to justify thinking that a top half would be where they should be finishing. So I think where they are at the moment is where they should be at as a club.
Exactly.
It's so I don't see whoever comes in short term is it going to make a huge difference to that. And yeah, it just seems a very odd move, and it's like I said, I think they're just panicking because there's only a couple of points in it, whereas perhaps last year, a good with like what was it, Watford and I think who else was it last season, were more or less down.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think who it was now, but I think it's just the way, isn't it? We'll park it there. We'll definitely continue this chat another time because it feels like this has still got legs in it. Just to make sure Rory doesn't yell at us because we haven't mentioned Arsenal. Well done, Arsenal. And Bukayo Saka is the first player to reach double figures for goals and assists this season in the Premier League. So well done to him. He's 21 years old, doing fantastically well. I'm just going to quickly run down through the other results that did take place over this weekend. So Nottingham Forest losing against Newcastle 2-1. Aston Villa beating Bournemouth, Andy, 3-0. Quite straightforward there. Brentford winning, or drawing, should I say, 1-1 against Leicester City. I think that was a bit of a surprise point there anyway for Leicester, given their form. And Wolverhampton Wanderers losing 4-2 to Leeds at home. Believe it or not, this fixture had the same scoreline 2 years ago. And the interesting one for you, Andy, same goal scorers on that day as well. How spooky is that? Almost on par with Solly March scoring on the 15th minute on the 15th day, right? So yes, on that point, we are going to take a break and take you in to some Serie A. And we are here for some Serie A action. we had some fantastic games, Andy, some big ones as well, because we had the Derby Della Capitale. So we saw Lazio taking on Roma. We also had the Derby d'Italia, which was Inter taking on Juventus. And that's the thing that I want to lead with first, Andy, was that handball decision that changed the complexity of the game. And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. How is that not handball? Not just
I
for Rabiot, but also for Vlahovic. I mean, it's bonkers.
Yeah, I saw that. Just before we came in the pod, I watched it about 4 or 5 times, just thinking, all right, from a referee's point of view, Vlahovic, right, maybe there's a bit of an argument there. You can't be 100% certain, but it looked like he brushed his arm at the very least. But you give him give him the benefit of a doubt. But with Rabiot, I'm just like, he's literally taking it down with his arm. And I mean, all right, it's a nice pass out wide, but yeah, you can understand Inter fans not being happy with that one. I mean, granted, the defending for the goal itself was extremely poor.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But
Yeah,
separately, the
but
handball
yeah,
decision was terrible, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah,
the
it's
amount of times, I think the rationale given as well, apparently, according to the press, is that they took forever to decide whether it was handball. And by that kind of hypothesis, because it wasn't clear and obvious, they decided that it should be given as a goal. But I'm sorry, but every kind of clip that I see, you can kind of see the ball kind of bounce in a different direction. And even at the time, I was just expecting it to be ruled off,
yeah.
just because of that. But as you highlighted, Inter were pretty poor in this match. Probably not helped by the way Juventus play, which is quite dogged, quite defensive minded. However, they kind of played into their hands, like you say, for that first goal between Damian and Dumfries. I don't know what they were doing, but down that right hand side, they were really exposed, left it open, made it easy for Juventus. And Juventus, to be fair, up until that point, were the more threatening. They kind of looked like they were going to cause some troubles. They were pressing quite often. Fagioli in the middle of pitch seemed to be just purring. He seemed to love it every moment. He kind of got the ball, doing flicks. So it really did kind of cater to his game. Interestingly, we didn't see Di Maria come on. He was left on the bench for this particular match. But there was a bit worrying signs for Juventus fans and Italy fans. Federico Chiesa hobbled off after coming on initially as a substitute. Andy, I do feel sorry for him because he's a guy
He's
I'd
had a
love to
lot of it.
see playing.
He's had a lot of injury issues over the past, well, more or less since the Euros, going back that far, really. And I think, for both the football fan and for Italy fans, but he's a vital part of the national setup, and it would be for Juve if he could stay fit. So hopefully it's nothing too serious. I mean, at the end of the day, if he needs to keep himself out of his international break for his long-term health, then I don't think many people would complain about that. But yeah, it is a miss for them. But for goalie, I think he's been impressive. I think that's probably good coaching. That finding solution, when
Pure
Allegri's been
fluke from Allegri,
maybe
one or the others.
maybe a little bit of both. Who knows? But to be fair, though, when you look at where they were around about what just before the World Cup, when you're in the position where you're massively under pressure, you've been dumped up the Champions League, and obviously, you'd be deducted 15 points. That there's not much movement in the transfer market. You have to find solutions from within, and for by fortune or whatever, they've found that in midfield, and their midfield looks the most balanced it has been for a few years. Rabiot, to be fair, is having quite a good season.
Yeah, definitely has.
He seems to have got a bit of consistency, kept his head down, and got on with it. Which is not something you normally associate with him.
Would not predicted it at the beginning of the season, that's for sure.
Not at all. And they're finding ways to get results. Kostic has been impressive.
I think he's been a good player.
Yeah,
good player. We fancied it from Frankfurt, didn't we?
Yeah. And what he does the same thing at Juve as he did at Frankfurt. He always goes for the far posts with his finishes and hits it low and hard. The bit that just really confused me for that goal was Onana's positioning. I'm not a goalkeeper, so maybe I've missed something, but I don't understand his positioning. Like, surely, why are you at your near post and have that much space to your left?
Yeah.
He's got to do. You kind of showing him where to put it, but not putting yourself in a position where you can save it.
It also doesn't help when Dumfries is in front of you, flat in front of you, and is supposedly trying to block that side, but then doesn't even stick out a leg. It's just like,
I mean, Darmian Dumfries between them was an absolute shit show. I mean, even after that goal, Kostic was just left in space on a good
constant
2-3
times. Yeah.
occasions, and with a bit more of gambling at the far post with a nice little cross, and it could have been a lot worse for Inter. And I felt that aside from the likes of Barella and Mkhitaryan trying shots on range, they didn't really penetrate particularly much.
Yeah.
They didn't have many proper clear-cut chances, but they have, like what seems to be the trend this weekend, though, is Serie A's getting people sent off after the game is finished.
This was their favourite sport, wasn't it? This weekend.
Oh, it was. It's just so unnecessary as well. Like, it was a naughty little dig for Ambrosia at the end, and it was just unnecessary. And then, obviously Paredes gets himself involved unnecessarily, even though his team have won the game.
But he loves it. He's that type of player. He just loves rubbing them up the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, he's part of the Argentina's World Cup squad.
Exactly.
Like, all of them love shit housing. So yeah.
But quick word on Inter then. Obviously, you saw them in this match. They're in the Champions League quarterfinals somehow. Do you feel they're the weakest side in this kind of last 8 of the Champions League? Because I fancy Benfica on the form they're in.
Yeah.
And just a quick word in terms of the league as well. Do you think Inter end up in the top 4 by the end of this season? Because the way they're going, I think they're falling out of it.
I mean, they've lost 3 out of their last 5 recently, which is poor by their standards. Losing to they've lost to Spezia, they've lost to Bologna, teams that should really be beaten, to be honest. So if you look at their fixtures, they've got Salernitana, Monza, Empoli, games where they feel they should get some points out of, to give themselves a bit of confidence. But and with a couple of games before that Benfica tie, maybe they could put themselves in a bit of form before then. But again, if you go on the current situation as it is now, there is a danger that they'll do one of 2 things. They'll either be in dreadful form, they get battered by Benfica anyway, or they start panicking about top 4, not put their full focus in the Champions League, and then get dumped out through that, by that approach. But yeah, you would certainly back Benfica as it stands.
And looking at Juventus, obviously, if it wasn't for the 15-point deduction, they'd be technically second place right now, having a fantastic second half of this season, given the shit we gave them in the first part of this season. What do you put it down to? Do you think they've just found a groove, or is it more personnel just pulling out results? What do you reckon?
I think they just found the groove. I think maybe because they weren't able or could afford to get rid of Allegri, it's kind of feels like everyone's at Juve has just been forced to make do with what they've got and make it work. But to be fair, even just after the World Cup, they put through 5 or 6 clean sheets in a row, put together a really good run of results, and I think there seems, with the Europa League campaign going as well as it is for them as well, I think there's a belief that they can still get something out of this season. I think they seem to have found a bit of freedom. They've got that 15-point deduction. They can't control that. They can't control what happens next, but they can certainly sort of control the results going forward. And I think, I think getting the Indian summer out of Di Maria has helped them massively, because he's, I was hugely critical of that signing. I thought it was a very typical Juve signing. Sign somebody who's
high
like
wages, free transfer,
high wages, 34, free transfer, but and Di Maria, for watching him for over the years, has never really come across as somebody who can fight and scrap when your team are up against it. But it seems to have done all right for Juve. So, yeah.
Certainly has, alongside a Wojciech Szczesny, who didn't concede. So well done, Wojciech. We will now move on.
We
have to mention it just because I give him enough shit every week anyway. Let's move on to the other game, the derby, the Della Capitale, which was Lazio taking on Roma. As you nicely introduced as well for the previous match, lots of red cards after this match as well as during it, thanks to a certain Ibanez. Terrible defending. I don't know what he was doing for half of it, but Lazio certainly deserved this. Andy, Luis Alberto seemed to be on fire. I think the scene that kind of summarizes this match really nicely is when Ibanez does get sent off. Sergei Milinkovic-Savic is rolling his shoulders, winding up the crowd to give it even more shit. But yeah, fantastic win for Lazio, puts them into second place. Maurizio Sarri, he seems to, I think, love this relationship with Lazio. It feels like it's a nice fit because it's a club that he can kind of embellish, make it into his own. Do you think they've got enough to stay in the top four at this point?
I think so. And I think with Maurizio Sarri, the thing that he's not been afforded at his previous clubs is time. And he was underappreciated, treated disgracefully by the Chelsea fans, to be honest.
And Juventus, in fairness.
And Juventus fans. He's one of those, his face didn't fit. He's not like a young, fashionable Nagelsmann type, Tuchel or hipster with glasses, basically. He's not that kind of figure.
Yeah.
And it feels like those kind of fan bases made a judgment out of him, before they decided before he'd even got the job that he wasn't it. And I don't think he'd helped that too much. So ultimately, even though he did win the league with he's won the league title, he's won a trophy, those past those aforementioned clubs. So yeah, I think with Lazio fans, they do have a little bit of us against them mentality. I mean, if they could be a little bit racist, maybe a little bit less racist, maybe that wouldn't be the case. But no, aside from that, I think he's a good fit. They do play some nice football, and you can see it in their performances that they're slowly getting better at sort of keeping it, working it. Granted, you get Luis Alberto, who just goes to hell with it a lot of the time, just picks up the ball and has a go. And he was the catalyst for a lot of the penetration that went on for that game. So I think, I think Richard Sarri deserves a lot of credit, because I remember we were saying about a month or so ago, we thought Lazio didn't have the consistency. Yeah, maybe they still won't, but they've certainly given themselves a good chance. But I think but they're even getting with Pedro and Felipe Anderson. He's considering they're sort of bombed out the Premier League, he's getting performances out of them. Cataldi's, Sakagni, done quite well this season as well, been consistent. I thought, and obviously on Roma's part, it was just brain dead moments, really, to be honest with you. With Ibanez, I felt sort of sorry for him on that second on the second yellow that he got, because he realised he'd mistimed it, pulls out.
Back,
but it's probably fair to say the Lazio player absolutely made sure there was going to be contact.
Yeah, Milinkovic-Savic made sure he bought that.
There was no way he was going to avoid that tackle whatsoever. He was going to make sure he got hit. But it is what it is. At the end of the day, he committed himself. He was late, and however unfortunate it is for him, that's an unfortunate consequence. And when you've got to play 60 odd minutes with 10 men, it doesn't normally end well for you. Obviously, obviously they had the disallowed goal as well, but Smalling was well offside and didn't need to be there. So it's I think it's just a bad day at the office for Roma. They seem to be incredibly inconsistent at the moment. You don't know what you're going to get for them week in, week out at the moment, because they pull out some great performances and then they just have some absolute stinkers like they've done at the weekend. And I think their discipline as well. Obviously, they went down to 10 men against Sassuolo. As well, Jose keeps getting himself sent off. They've had a couple of players sent off again. And it's not like even at the end of games, they're getting players sent off before half time.
I know.
Kumbala the previous match week against Sassuolo. And, at the end of the day, if you can go 10, 15 minutes, probably down to 10 men and maybe see it out. But for a whole half or more, it's difficult.
Not achievable.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a bit more calm and discipline.
Yes, but that won't happen with Mourinho.
No, of course
that wouldn't be a Mourinho style.
It wouldn't be entertaining otherwise, would it? So
no, exactly.
I think Lazio played well. They deserve
they deserved it more than deserved it. Bad day in the office for Roma. Unlucky Roma fans.
I thought Rui Patricio probably kept him in it, to be honest.
He was the only one that deserves any credit out of this match.
If that game finished 3-4-0 to Lazio, I don't think Roma could have had any complaints.
No, exactly.
To be honest.
Exactly. Well, Andy, I want to go to the history making that took place in Udine. So it was Udinese who took on Milan. Udinese winning this match 3-1. This despite Ibrahimovic setting a record for not only being the oldest player in Serie A to turn out, but also being the oldest player to score a goal. This is the record that he took away from Alessandro Costacurta, who was 37 years old when he scored for AC Milan, ironically. But yeah, again, we when we're talking about Roma and inconsistency, we're having this same conversation with Milan again. It felt like a few weeks ago that it turned a corner and then they bring out this performance. Now, Udinese haven't been fantastic this season, but they've been one of those that kind of showed a glimmer of what they could potentially show us in the first half of this season. And this, ironically, after they lost to Milan in Milan, and that was a 4-2 defeat on the day. But yeah, Udinese truly deserved this result. What have you made of this particular game? Because me and Rory were talking about who's superlatives, I suppose, about how Pioli turned a corner, got Malik Thiaw, who kind of showed some potential to be a really dominant force. But again, it was that kind of slip up. They were sloppy. They weren't picking up markers. And they just made it easy for Udinese. I mean, how did you see this result?
Yeah, I thought AC Milan were like sloppy. They seemed to be sloppy in possession. They gave the ball away to some really sort of dodgy places. To be honest, and I mean the goals. Usually there's no such thing as a bad goal, but all three of the Udinese goals were fucking awful. I mean, they're goals, and but if you're the defending side and you've conceded, Pereira's goals just sort of crawled in. The last goal from Kingsley just was tapped in really awkwardly, and it was just some really just very, very strange defending and even stranger finishing. But and obviously there was a whole hoo-ha with the penalty being retaken and and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think Milan they just weren't at it. I think although they they've had history being made that Zlatan Ibrahimovic is the oldest player to score the goal in the Premier League. The fact they're still having to turn to him for goals is still a little bit on the worrying side.
Yeah.
It's it feels like Giroud post World Cup, with obviously Zlatan Ibrahimovic's injury issues, Divock Origi's not quite done it. They're really lacking a proper goal scorer up front at the moment, and I think that's something they need to invest in during the summer. But yeah, I think they just when Milan play badly, they have a stinker. They're not,
Yes.
They're not the sort of team who can grind out a result when they're playing badly.
Yeah.
We've seen Napoli do it a couple of times this season. Juve are very, very good at doing it, but Milan aren't. And even last season, to be fair, if they played badly, they would get a negative result. They just don't seem to have an ability to grind out results or do the basics right when you're not playing well.
Yeah.
I think that's been the difficulty for them over the season, is just keep do the basics well, and the rest of it will come afterwards.
Did you hear about the mad stats about Marco Silvestri, the Udinese goalkeeper, and his record with penalty kicks? So obviously Ibrahimovic initially had his effort saved but despite that, there was encroachment, and it meant he had to retake it, which he obviously took. But Silvestri has also previous where he's saved 3 other penalties, and on each occasion they've also been retaken due to encroachment by a defender. And so it goes to show you Udinese not very good at defending penalty kicks either. They just need to make sure they just don't run in the box when that happens. But good result for Udinese there. I'm going to move on quickly because we have got a few games to talk about as well. The big one being Sampdoria, who I didn't anticipate would ever be talking about having a victory, but they did take it. They won 3-1 against Hellas Verona. Maniolo Gabbiadini for the second goal was a spectacular effort from distance. And Andy, a name from the past, Jesse Rodriguez, that Stoke City legend. He set up the third for Alessandro Zanoli, who took his effort really well. Zanoli, who we spoke about last week on the pod for his performance against Juventus, a player to keep an eye out of for sure. But I'm going to run through the fixtures that did take place. So on Friday night, we saw Sassuolo taking a much important win against Spezia. Spezia are now very much in the kind of relegation dogfight. I did expect them to pull themselves out of it, but it feels like they're getting dragged into it. Atalanta also securing a 2-1 win against Empoli, so good win there. Monza drawing 1-1 against Cremonese. Salernitana, a side that we've been slating, Andy, starting to pick up results. So they got a result on Monday against Milan, and they got a result this time against Bologna. So 2-2 there. Good result for them, given the form of Bologna. And in terms of Sunday's fixtures, we also saw Fiorentina winning 1-0 against Lecce. And the other game, Torino losing 4-0 to Napoli again. Napoli looking superb. I don't know if you saw the header for this one, in particular from Osimhen.
No.
But we talk about Osimhen and his all-round game. And I think there's been for a few weeks people saying about he can't header the ball. Well, he took his effort superbly in this match from a Zielinski corner. Definitely YouTube it if you haven't already done so. So that pretty much makes sure that Napoli are top of the table at the moment. Their next game when they're coming back from the international break is against AC Milan. So that'll be a feisty game for sure. But at the bottom as well, Cremonese are now bottom with Sampdoria and Hellas Verona in the other places. Andy, we're going to now move on to its international week/weekend. And we have got, as you can tell by the enthusiasm of Andy, we're definitely looking forward to this week and weekend. But let's use this kind of 10 minutes to kind of talk about England taking on Italy. It'll take place in Naples on Thursday. Contrasting feelings from both camps here. So I'm going to take over from an Italian perspective, and you would talk about England. If we start off with England, I think the squad choices seemed a bit underwhelming. Didn't feel necessarily like a lot of players were picked based on form. It seems to be another Southgate's favourites, but the one player that seems to be looking likely that he might turn up for this match is Ivan Toney. Do you think there is a chance that he could come on or maybe even start in this match?
Yeah, I think as much as I mean, the squad selection was a bit of a shocker, to be honest with you. But out of people that have absolutely earned their place, Ivan Toney is one of them.
Yeah.
And I think if it wasn't for his extracurricular activities, probably could have potentially been in the World Cup squad. But no, he deserves his opportunity, and I think he deserves at least a chance. Even if it's like 20 minutes in the game. The Nations League isn't that important. I think with Kane, he could do with a bit of a rest for both club and country at the moment. So, yeah, you'd certainly give him a chance, and I think he certainly deserves one.
Definitely. And the other name I think could stand a chance is maybe James Maddison, based on his form for Leicester City. Mason Mount had to pull out of the squad today. Do you think this gives him a chance of coming off the bench or, making a cameo appearance? Because we're not just talking about Italy. Obviously, England have also got to take on Ukraine. So, yeah, chance for him to actually make one of those games?
He should do, yeah. It's because he's one of the few sort of proper attacking midfielders of quality that's in that England squad at the moment. Because, I mean, Conor Gallagher, I don't know what he's done to get to the England squad. Jordan Henderson's been absolutely pony for a while.
Yeah.
Calvin Phillips hasn't even played football. Has he really?
Baffling.
Like it's utterly bewildering. Even Declan Rice is probably having he's having an okay season, but he's in a
Not
difficult
brilliant.
situation.
No, I wouldn't
Not
necessarily
brilliant.
have him there. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean that's where I'm worried about squad. The forwards, you can go, you know what, fair enough.
yeah,
And
exactly.
if you miss out to one of those forwards that are in the England squad at the moment, that's not a disgrace, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. And I think Southgate has chosen well there, but it's just a midfield. We're going to get overrun by Italy. I mean, Jude Bellingham and James Maddison are probably the only two midfielders in that squad that are on form and can make a difference. But you just know that he's going to play a midfield three of Henderson, Phillips, and Bellingham, and even in defence as well. It's just Mark Gray's been part of the Crystal Palace squad that has not exactly been keeping goals out. Granted, he's a very promising player. I probably will be a fixture for England going forward, so fair enough. But Harry Maguire, I don't like to keep piling on him, but you can understand why opposition, fans of other teams are like, what the hell? When you got
Exactly.
Tomori, he's been one of the best centre backs in Serie A for quite a long time now. There's other centre backs that play week in, week out in the Premier League that I don't
Lewis Dunk.
that yeah, Lewis Dunk. Same with Eric Dyer as well.
Oh, he's terrible. I
He's
just
not
don't get. He's got
yeah.
something on Southgate, hasn't he? He's got some pictures,
he
hasn't he,
must
or
have
something like that.
he must have his OnlyFans or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Again as well, like with Jordan Pickford, I think his form has been a bit, alongside with the rest of Everton, he hasn't been particularly
I felt
great.
he
And
could have saved something against Chelsea. One of those goals he should have saved, I feel.
yeah, but again, you still know for a fact that regardless of what's happening at club level, Ramsdale's not going to start ahead of him, and Pickford is going to be the number one. So yeah, I think it was an opportunity for Southgate to refresh the squad a little bit. Because it's the first international break after the World Cup, a good chance to see what other players are going to be there for the next cycle. Because the other side of it as well is that there's, the likes of Eric Dyer, Jordan Henderson, I'd be very, very surprised if they're still in the picture by the time the Euros come around. In 18 months' time. So it's very odd squad planning from Southgate.
Yes. Well, I think for the Italy perspective, you kind of have similar kind of debates going on. The big issue is up top at the moment for Italy because they don't necessarily have a recognised striker that is scoring goals. So if I mention these names, you probably will shake your head, Andy, and go, who? But Vincenzo Grifo, who's been brought in from Freiburg, Simeone Pafundi, he's a youth player that is playing for Udinese, hasn't appeared for the Italy national squad. And then you've also got Matteo Retegu, who plays currently in Tigre in Mexico. He qualifies because he is Argentinian by birth, but he qualifies through his grandparents who have got Italian
Sketchy
passports. Exactly. So they're coming out. They're coming out right now.
Why they went to Argentina.
But there's also been a few questions about their midfield as well. Like we mentioned about Fagioli, should he be in the squad? There's no Locatelli, for example. Even when you look at the defensive lineup, so if I mention these names, you probably will kind of connect these. So Francesco Acerbi at Inter, you've got Leonardo Bonucci at Juventus, who's basically on last legs. He's got glass legs these days. Alessandro Buongiorno, who plays for Torino. Matteo Damian, who's mentioned in Inter. So I think a lot of those England attacking players will be purring at this. Giovanni Di Lorenzo at Napoli, having a good season. Federico Di Marco, having a great season at Inter. But then you look at Alessio Romagnoli at Lazio, Giorgio Scalvini, who I do rate, but maybe a bit young for this to go into this game from Atalanta. Spinazzola from Roma, we know what he can do. And Rafael Toloi at Atalanta. So yeah, when you think about that, you kind of think there's some weaknesses there, but it's midfield, as you alluded to. They're quite strong. So Barella, they got Cristante, Fratesi, Jorginho, Pellegrini, Matteo Pessina from Monza, which was a bit of a surprise, Sandro Tonali at Milan, and Marco Verratti from PSG. So yeah, I'm curious about how this match goes. I feel that if England score an early goal, they might score more. But where do you naturally see this game going? Do you think it'll be a case of Southgate sets up to close off and make sure there's no chances in this game and then go on the counter-attack? Or do you feel it'll go the other way?
I think England will do what we do quite often under Southgate, is that they'll attack early and try and nick an early goal, and then Southgate will revert to type and try and close it down. The problem I see is if Italy score first, I don't think there's enough creativity in the squad to be able to break the Italian defenders down. I don't think there's certainly what Southgate, I suspect, will put up as a starting lineup. He'd have to be forced into making changes quite proactively. And Gareth Southgate's not the most proactive of managers. He tends to leave it a bit too late to make changes a lot of the time. So yeah, I think it'll be a difficult. I see it being a difficult game for England, but we'll see. Italy sides don't tend to care too much unless it's a major tournament. Granted, they still got to get to them.
Yeah, this is it.
No, I think it's a big game. I think it's a good barometer for both teams as to where they are.
Exactly.
I think, and it's the sort of game you want to see. Ultimately, you don't want to see the likes of England. Same with Italy as well, playing at the likes of Belarus or someone like that. And you want to play like proper competitive games against top class opposition. And it's only really when you play that level of opposition you get a bit of an idea of where you're at.
Fantastic. Andy, I know you were kind of prepping to see if there was an obscure game from the international weekend that we should keep an eye out on. Did you manage to find that obscure game that we should look out for?
Yeah, so there's, if you fancy getting up at 3:00 in the morning on Thursday, there's El Salvador versus Honduras. And if you ever watched the CONCACAF Champions League and the teams from there, it will just basically be the both of kicking shit out of each other for a good solid 90 minutes. But it'll certainly be entertaining. In a very weird matchup on Friday, you've got Uzbekistan versus Bolivia. It's a very, very, very random matchup. And then you've got Argentina, who clearly want to feel better about themselves and keep the vibe going because they've got a game against Panama. It's just, that's just bad. I don't see what's to be gained from arranging a friendly like that, but you obviously just want to feel good about themselves. If you fancy being a real hipster, you've got Georgia versus Mongolia. You've got Indonesia,
okay,
and also Russia. The Football Union of Russia playing Iran in the authoritarian regime derby.
Yes. Yeah.
So you've got that. If you fancy a bit of underdog, you've got the Faroe Islands playing North Macedonia. And then, going into sort of next week, you've got some really random ties that nobody will particularly care about. You've got Iran versus Kenya. You've got UAE versus Thailand if you fancy a bit of Asian football. Some decent matchups there. If you're looking at decent matchups, Japan, Colombia, I think will be a good game. Chile, Paraguay. Very competitive. That'll be a very competitive friendly, I think it's fair to say, between the two sides. So there are some, some good games knocking about. And for Rory, who's obviously not with us tonight, the Republic of Ireland might win a football match against Latvia.
We use that line for Scotland, don't we?
Yes. Well, I mean, the Republic of Ireland aren't much better. But yeah, let's see who Scotland have got this international break. I'm just having a quick look now, actually, to see if they might actually win a football match. They've got Georgia. No, that's
they always seem to
there
Georgia.
we are. No, they're going to get battered. They're going to get absolutely battered. The reason why is they've got Spain next week on the 28th. They will get stuffed, and it'll be a very Scotland thing to do to lose to Cyprus at home on Saturday. This is the qualifiers as well at Hampden. Yeah, so they've got 2 games at Hampden, one against Cyprus, the other against Spain. Fuck me, I'd hate to see the atmosphere if they lost against Cyprus, but
yeah. Well, listeners, viewers, I'm sure you're spoilt for choice with those options. But I think that gives a wrap to this particular episode. So many thanks to Andy for his contributions as ever. And make sure you listeners and viewers subscribe to our social media channels. So on Twitter at Italian Anglo Pod, or if you go onto TikTok or YouTube or any other kind of social media platforms, we are at Anglo-Italian Podcasts. So many thanks as ever. Hope you have a great week of watching internationals. We'll be on the other side, making sure you get into the groove of the Premier League and Serie A. But for now, we will be waving goodbye and we'll see you at sometime soon. Take care, everyone.